And the second type of group we had was a group that had the negative influence, or the instigator, as I've chosen to call them. So within these groups, we had one instigator who, during the survey, would get up and take a brownie for themselves. They would then sit down, eat the brownie, and observe what the rest of the group In the second type of group that we had this instigator get up and take the brownie, but then we had someone else, the positive influence, who I've called the defender, reprimand that person for taking the brownie. So they would say, "What are you doing? Spencer didn't say those are for us," or "Those are Mr. Peter's brownies. We shouldn't be eating them." And then the two would observe what the rest of the group would do. And I didn't go into the room. In fact, I sent them in and I gave them the instructions because I didn't want them to ask me about the brownies once I got inside. So we withheld all information about the brownies and we had the experiment run. And these are the results. So, we had groups of 6 here, 5 different groups. In the control group, according to my observer, everyone was staring at the brownies. But nobody took a brownie. That's very good. Morality persists. Right. We had or perhaps it's just the social validation. We had, in the second type of group, we had an instigator. And in that group, 3 other group members got up and took brownies. We had another group with an instigator. And in that group, all of the brownies were We then had the 2 final groups of the instigator and defender. We had, in one case, 3 brownies eaten. And in the other case, perhaps a really strong defender, we had absolutely no brownies. Now, what do these results tell us? They tell us, well, firstly, the results sort of confirm the ideas of social validation. The highest case of eating was in the instigated groups. In lower cases where there was an influence, but then a defender, we had fewer cases of brownies being taken. And in the control group, without any influence, and this has actually served as a very good base for us, no brownies were eaten. A good control group. And in no cases did just one other person take a brownie. So what that tells us is that once that one person had been instigated, the activity was now socially valid, and more people took. We have no cases where just 1 or 2 people, but the fewest number of brownies that we have taken, in a case where brownies were taken, are 3 brownies. This is a very important point as well. And then there were some interesting stories. So, I don't want to reveal the identities of the participants, but my house, Tana House, seemed to live up to their informal motto on that day, namely, eat and leave. And they cleared all the brownies. That was the one group with one of the instigators. In another group, one of my instigators was accused by the randomly selected participants of theft. A very interesting conversation to have also. And then one of the houses actually had a lengthy discussion about whether the brownies were put there for them. After which, half of those members proceeded to take brownies as they did. And so, just to talk a little bit about some of the limitations in the experiment and the study, we had quite a small sample within the school. There were very few groups. We did only 5 groups. And one of the other big things is that students are familiar with one another. So ideally, it would have been conducted with strangers. If Spencer is known, perhaps for his style of eating or familiarity with Mr. Peter's apartment, and I'm seen taking a brownie, people may not view it in the same light as if there were a different sort of influence. Perhaps I am not considered, or my social behavior is not envied by others, and they believe we shouldn't copy what Spencer's doing, and therefore the instigator might have had the opposite influence to what they were meant to. So there were just these little details. With strangers, of course, you don't have that background, and you can measure that slightly more accurate. So the verdict on ALA students. Nice, but with the potential of being naughty. So ALA students are very much corruptible in this but proved to be morally true when there was absolutely no influence at all. And I would just like to thank all the participants, willing and unknowing, who participated in this experiment. Thank you for contributing to its success. Thank you all. I have time for 2 questions. Are there any questions from the audience? No questions? Oh, yes, Mr. Altair.
I'm not sure if this is exactly a question, but if you had faced just a defender in the group, who, when they came into the room, would have said, "Don't touch these brownies, these are Mr. Peter's brownies. Last time he left them out, they all got eaten," what do you think would have happened?
That's a very interesting case. And I think again there, it might have been more useful in such a case to have it with a completely strange group of people. But I think that probably we would have had in that case 1 or 2 people taking brownies. I think that being alerted to the fact that the brownies were there before and being eaten is also a form of social validation. So the act had been done, much like the cases of littering, suicide, theft, crime, and so on. The act had been done before, and therefore, to some extent, even though we had a defender who was kind of saying, you know, "I'm watching you, you're in front of us if you're taking the brownies," I think that just the fact that it had been done before would have, maybe 1 or 2 very confident people might have gone and taken the brownies. Abdurrahman.
Do you think that the fact of not taking the brownies were motivated for moral purposes or rather for fear purposes? Like, were they scared that Mr. Peter, of the implications of taking the brownies, or were they morally affected of it?
I think that it probably has more to do with the fact that those people are within the group. And I can't say much about the morality of the issue, but I think that it has a lot to do with our actions being linked to what others think of us. And in that case, taking that brownie represents a certain risk within that group. And I think it would have been interesting perhaps to test if participants were told to keep this absolutely anonymous. You're going in there 1 at a time and filling out the survey. And perhaps the brownies were still on the table. Then perhaps one could look at whether people then, without anyone else knowing whether or not they took the brownie, whether they would have done it or not. And then perhaps you can look more at the morality. Thank you very much, everyone.